So welcome to tonight's event. This is on UK genre film festivals with a particular focus on horror, as is our nature. If you haven't been to one of our events before, Shelley and I co-convened the BAFTSS Horror Studies SIG, and we have, I was going to say monthly, but maybe kind of, relatively
we try
events. We do try. But sometimes things get the better of us. So we're really delighted to have an excellent panel here tonight to talk about horror film festivals. So I'm going to introduce our chair for this evening, who is Russ Hunter. Russ is assistant professor in film and TV studies in the Department of Arts at Northumbria University. And he's worked closely with a number of European film festivals. Russ's research focuses upon film festivals and genre film. And he's given talks at a wide variety of international festivals to general audiences and to filmmakers, including Abertoir Horror Festival, Babel Film Festival, the European Minority Film Festival, and Sunderland Shorts. Russ is currently working with a number of European genre film festivals, such as Offscreen in Brussels and Kuriopol in Slovenia, where he organises a variety of educational initiatives. And I'm going to hand over to Russ to introduce our panellists. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Laura. Yeah, just before I introduce the panelists, big thank you to Laura and Shelley. It's not easy to organise these events, takes a lot of time. So really appreciate that. And also big thank you to you for coming tonight. I know it's 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, so appreciate you all being here. As Laura said, if you keep your questions till the end. Once we start to get towards the end of the questions I have for the panel and our discussion, I'll let you know when you can put the questions in the chat. Otherwise, they'll just get lost in the general chat otherwise. A couple of things just again before we sort of introduce the panelists. One of the reasons we wanted to do this, and it was myself and Nia that sort of put this together really, is because in the post-2000 period there was this kind of explosion of genre festivals in the UK, and quite a lot of festivals that are quite long-lived came about at that moment in time. Lots of festivals have come and gone as well. That happens quite a lot on the festival circuit. But what we thought it would be interesting to do was to take some festivals that are quite long-lived and can therefore kind of see the long game of festivals, as well as understanding the dynamics of the festival industry at the moment, and have a discussion with some of those people. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nia Edwards-Behi, please. She is from Abertoir Horror Festival, there she is. Chris Cooke from Mayhem Film Festival. And Rob Nevitt from Celluloid Screams in Sheffield. Also, we're kind of suitably northern and non-southern in terms of the festivals we've got here, and indeed Welsh as well. So that's good. I just wanted to start off, first of all, just asking you sort of quite generally, really, about your festivals, just to give a bit of context for the audience, really, just to give us a sense of how your festivals came about and really what the aim of your festivals is. What are you trying to do with each of your festivals? Perhaps we could start with you, Nia.
Certainly can. Thanks, Russ, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, so Abertoir Horror Festival, I'm Nia. I'm co-director of the festival. I can see that one Gaz Bailey has joined this call, who is director of Abertoir, and indeed Abertoir is his baby. He established the festival back in 2006 at Aberystwyth Arts Centre. If you don't know where Aberystwyth is, it's on the coast of West Wales in a university town. It started off as sort of a 3-day festival, a bit of a weekend that was built around Robin Hardy promoting his book at the time, and a screening of The Wicker Man and so on. And it has grown from there, essentially. So I attended the festival in that first year and for the first few years as an audience member. And I genuinely wish I could remember what year it was that I actually joined the team, but I genuinely don't know. But it's been a while. It was a long time ago, and sort of as the festival has grown, my involvement has grown, and there are, several other members of the team as well. The bulk of our festival, I suppose, as you might expect, is brand new, pre-release horror films. Generally that are, on the festival circuit and so on. But we do have a strong emphasis on classics, and that is partly down to our taste as programmers, I suppose. We kind of can't not put some classics in there, and there's a strong sort of emphasis on acknowledging where the genre has come from, I suppose, as well as platforming new films that we enjoy and think are worth seeing. And also because we are based in an art centre, so that's a sort of a multi-use art centre, so to speak, we do always incorporate and have always incorporated other types of events into our programme to make the most of where we're based. So we will almost always have some sort of performance or theatrical element to the festival. We'll have, you know, the expected stuff like Q&As, some presentations and so on. We'll stick a pub quiz up in the bar. We'll have music events. We also go off-site, which is a whole thing. So yeah, we really try to sort of make the most of our venue in that regard. And then finally, I suppose, just to sort of the thing I always like to sort of bring out when we try and like sum up what Abertoir's all about is essentially that we take horror seriously and we take the film seriously and we take the work seriously, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. And I think that probably sums up the Abertoir ethos, I think.
Thanks, Dia. That's great. Chris.
Hello. Mayhem's been going now. This is its 20th year that we're heading into. It's an October set. Thanks very much, Rob. It's an October set. I wouldn't have made it without you guys. But it's an October set festival. Although it started in May, hence it being called Mayhem. Our first edition was, well, I can't remember the exact date, but we started out as a short film festival. I used to co-direct a film festival called Bang in Nottingham, and you get a lot of horror films in, depending on which season was coming up and everything. And they kept thinking there isn't a proper showcase for all these horror filmmakers, and it felt like a real pity that they weren't getting the exposure that they needed. And obviously with shorts, you kind of think that there's like a sort of like a linear story. Do you know what I mean? Like the short film leads to, whatever else they want to make. So you want to be part of that journey. So it started for a couple of years as a short film festival supported by 1 or 2 features, and then became a weekend of features with shorts at the very heart of it. And it's kind of remained there, really. I mean, similar to Nia and Rob, I guess, as well. We kind of like to preview brand new films. But I think the thing that's different and maybe marks us out as traitors to the cause is that after a few years of being Mayhem Horror Film Festival, we became Mayhem Film Festival, horror, science fiction, and cult cinema. So I feel like it's a horror traitor. But we thought we'd do that because cult cinema meant we could justify and explain some of our more sort of left field choices. Like Bernard Mandico's Conan last year, do you know what I mean? Or Shia's Conan, as it had to be renamed hastily, causing us to delay printing of our brochure. But it's those kind of left field films that kind of like sort of for those festival goers who were there for the whole weekend. It's like a journey where they can be taken off the beaten track and then back onto the more regular beaten track, and then off again into some other direction, all because of that cult additional subtitle to what it is we do. Anyway, we do a lot of other things as well, so I could prattle on, but let's not.
We'll come back to that in a minute because we'll talk about programming in a second. But Rob, what about Celluloid Screams?
Yeah, so Celluloid Screams started in 2009. It kind of came about because I kind of was making short films as a horror obsessive and as an attendee of similar kinds of festivals. The main one that I was a regular at was Dead by Dawn in Edinburgh. And through that and through going to festivals with my shorts, I kind of started to take mental notes and go, something like this could surely work in Sheffield. I had no idea how to do it, no connections or anything. And weirdly, it kind of started when I'm not a DJ, but I somehow managed to convince the team at the showroom to let me do a film soundtrack night in their bar, which actually fell apart when the decks were stolen. Nothing to do with me. But by that point, I'd kind of involved myself and ingratiated myself enough with the people there that they agreed to let us do like a 6-week kind of introduction to horror kind of season. So we screened, just trying to think now. We did House That Dripped Blood, Pulse, the Kiyoshi Kurosawa film, I think, Rhett, and a couple of Suspiria and one other that I can't remember. And they all did really well and kind of sold out. So at that point, they were like, oh, maybe we could actually do a festival. And then they let us do a festival in 2009, and we've done it ever since. So yeah, we're going into the 16th year. Much like the other guys, we screen brand new films. We started off screening quite a few classics, much like Abertoir, and that took a dip, largely because as time's gone on, I think we've almost had like more brand new stuff that we'd wanted to show, and stuff's ended up, we had a short list and going, okay, we'll each pick a really, a film that we really want to screen that's a classic, and then it's, well, that's clearly got to go because we need this new film that we otherwise won't be able to do. And then we also do events year round as well. So we do a 35mm marathon in the summertime. And just today we've announced we're bringing back our all-nighter, which we did it during the festival until 2016. But we had loads of our audience saying, please stop doing the all-nighter because it ruins Sunday for us. And we sleep through all of the new films on the Sunday. So yeah, we're bringing that back next month. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Actually, you've all touched upon programming in some ways there, and obviously, programming is a key thing that structures the festival, but not just films, of course, but some of the other things you've talked about as well there. I just wonder if you could think about what is it that makes you select a particular theme for a festival maybe each year, or strands if you do it that way. What is it that makes you decide upon a particular film, but also what are the challenges of programming? Because obviously with programming there are lots of challenges, some of them perhaps just physical, some of them to do with premieres and all of those kinds of things. There's lots of complications that come with programming. So I just wondered if you could just say a little bit about why you choose what you choose, what's the rationale, but also if you could think about what some of the challenges are for you for programming, what are the difficulties that you face. Nia, maybe we could start with you again. I see you writing, so I'm going to go to you to make you feel awkward.
Thanks for that. It's just so I remember all of the things you just asked in that one question, Russ.
Sorry.
No, sorry, don't. Yeah, so I mean, it kind of like following on a little bit from what Chris was saying about like expanding out from horror as a sort of justification for showing like cult stuff and other stuff. We're much cheekier at Abertoir in that we just go, if we say it's horror, you just have to put up with it, right? Like She Is Conan, which I love. But I suppose part of the programming in that sense is, or part of programming is balance around that. So we, again, I guess following on a little bit from what Rob was saying as well with the balance of classics versus new films as well, and different types of films, is that we might have, a whole set of films that we really love, but then we go, oh, but they're all of them, I don't know, really slow, depressing horror dramas. And we just go, you can't fill the whole festival with that unless that was the point of it, I suppose. So that's one of the, I suppose, processes that we have to go through every year, is that when we're watching everything, it's not just about going, well, I loved that film, therefore I'm watching it, though that is often how it goes. It's about then going, but how does this fit into the wider program and stuff? So you do sometimes end up going, maybe we'll let that one slide because we've already got two that are a bit similar in whatever way that might be, in sort of tone or subgenre or whatever that is. Then like, I mean, I suppose that's also the challenge in a way. It is about sort of programming to your audience that is there. So if you've been doing it a few years, you've got a relatively set audience in there that's going to come year after year, or at least that exact makeup might change, but it's a relatively set audience. So you're sort of programming for them, but you're also programming for that unknown quantity that is coming from for the first time that year, or the audience that you're trying to reach, or like different segments of an audience that you're trying to reach. So you're sort of trying to program to all of that. But I think the one thing that we've always kept, I suppose, as one of our values at Abertoir is that if we, which I'm sure is absolutely not unique to us in the slightest, but we always sort of say, if we can't stand in front of that film and introduce it as something that we are really excited, or at least one of us is really excited for people to see, then we won't show it, even if it's like that year's big film that everyone else is showing or whoever is showing. We kind of feel like we have to personally be able to justify it, I suppose. Although that said, we will blind book some bigger titles sometimes, and then it sort of amounts to, well, we really want to see this film, we think our audience will really want to see this film, so even if it sucks, at least that has been the opportunity to see that film and go, oh, it was actually rubbish, the hype wasn't worth it.
It's a discussion point then, isn't it?
Absolutely. So yeah, I don't know, I let someone else have otherwise I'll just carry on. I'll let someone else have some input on that one.
Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up one of the things that Rob said, and that was just how important Adele was in Dead by Dawn. That's a real Pathfinder festival, but also run by a great person who kind of shares all of her knowledge and support, and it's fantastic. I mean, really, really fantastic festival. And the all-nighters was just made up of me snoring really loudly. But I think one of the things Nia's talking about is very true, right? That thing where you have to justify your choices, first of all, to each other in the team, which can be just as rigorous as testing yourself in front of an audience. And then is that thing about wanting to explain your choices, wanting to justify them, wanting to even when they are testing or will trouble the audience. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of there saying, yeah, but we're sort of like chaperones for the weekend. You know what I mean? We're your company. And I kind of think there are two layers of programming. Maybe there's more layers of programming, but there's two in the forefront of my mind right now. One of them is that kind of programming, the bigger picture, what's out there, what we can get, what we can build patterns and shapes from, and then actually putting together the festival, which film goes in which order. You know, who's the film that we open with? What do we close with? What's the mood set by that closing film? All those kind of questions have to be answered. So we're finding films so that we can build those patterns, so that we can build the shapes. They might not be sort of instantly thematic, but the themes might grow as the programming evolves.
Do you see any particular challenges from programming? I mean, particularly, for instance, being in a kind of UK context, is there anything that's difficult either in access to material that you might want, or just actually physically the act of programming and watching all of those films? Because that must be quite a difficult thing to do. It sounds like it's fun until you do it, I imagine.
I'm only 25 years old. Look what it's done to me. My thing is kind of, yeah, it's really bad for my back as I get older, but I still love doing it. I can't, you know what I mean? So it's like a pain. I think that there are tensions that are always really predictable. Do you know what I mean? That we all experience, which are kind of, are we going to be able to get that film? Are we going to be able to get that film on time? Are we going to be able to afford that film? All those kind of things, you know, bubble underneath, creating like a kind of a working tension. Do you know what I mean? And how best to approach asking for a film, who to ask for a film, and those kind of threats of things streaming early, or people not knowing what their plans are, and us having to kind of, you know, hold our cards close to our chest about what it is we're going to screen until we know exactly what's coming through. So it teaches you to be patient, even when you're kind of really nerve-wracked. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of a sort of double bind.
Yeah, I can imagine. Rob, what about you? Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Nia and Chris have said. Really, I think it's there is that thematic thing, and sometimes you do maybe have an idea of what you're going to want. But I think from my perspective, I always kind of put myself in the position of like mentally in the position of the audience of when I was going to festivals, because I have no time to go to them now, unfortunately. And what would I be thinking if this was a film that I was sat watching? And it's the same thing as we've just been saying, as everyone was just saying. It's about justification and sort of backing up your choices, really. And I think, you know, we have this conversation in the team. There's basically 3 of us that program on the festival, and even if not everyone thinks it's the greatest film, or, you know, we put something on, like we've 2 examples. We showed 2 films by Seth Smith. We showed The Crescent and we showed Tin Can, and our audience hated both of them. But I really think there's some value to those films being seen, and that's the thing. Nothing would be just a slot filler, if you like. You know, and as long as we believe in the things that we're programming, I think that's the main thing. But also, just on the subject of kind of themes emerging, we never really go into it thinking, right, we like a certain type of film or a certain type of theme, but themes seem to just emerge, even if they're not, you don't think, they kind of creep up on you. So like, I remember in 20, like one year anyway, there was a theme that we hadn't seen coming, which was bad parenting, like all the way through. So like, it was the year when we had Matriarch, Ben Steiner's Matriarch. And there was a load of other ones that were just all about questionable parental choices. And the same there was another year where it was, every film seemed to be about mistrust of whether the person you were talking to is really the person that they claim to be. And there was just tons of that in all different kind of guises. And we never thought, oh yeah, that we need another film like that. But they were all the films that we screened in any particular year. They're kind of all distinct, but somehow end up having this kind of like through flow going through them all. But yeah, I think it's just about kind of believing in what you do, really.
I mean, picking up on that a bit, do you feel that you have some responsibility to kind of lead taste as well a little bit, because you have access to stuff before other people? So in some senses, you're perhaps kind of leading horror taste to a certain extent. Do you kind of feel that, or is that fair or not fair?
It's kind of interesting. I think it's a conversation that happens about what the festival is. Do you know what I mean? And the festival is shared with an audience. You know, the audience share the experience of being at the festival with us. It's not us acting as gatekeepers and saying this is the taste you must have or something. Do you know what I mean? Because what's great is that there's a huge variety of films that are out there, and that there are huge varieties of festivals. It's like, you know, that are still going, like Nears and Rob's. And you know, your taste is developed throughout that kind of programming experience as well. Like films play well at festivals, and some of them don't play as well outside of festivals. So you're kind of aware of that as well. So you want those, you know, like we played Hundreds of Beavers last year, and that's a really beautiful festival film. After the first 20 minutes, everybody's on board, and it's just, you know, fantastic, hilarious. Well, it's hilarious. So I think there is that, and there are 3 of us on our team. Do you know what I mean? Like, I must mention them: Stephen Shield, who's a film director, and Melissa Geno, who's a programmer as well. And their taste is really like fantastic. Do you know what I mean? And they're always discovering things and putting them in front of all of us. Do you know what I mean? Someone's always bringing something to the table that's new and exciting, all the way through that kind of programming period of time. So you don't know what it is you're going to be the gatekeeper of.
Right.
You can't be the gatekeeper.
Interesting. Thank you. You've touched on your audiences. All of you a little bit have mentioned your audiences and kind of knowing your audiences. It strikes me that one of the things that's quite distinct about genre festivals and horror festivals is they're a fan-based audience typically. I just wondered how kind of aware you were of the dynamics of that as programmers and festival directors, and I guess what was, quite simply put, what's good about having a kind of fan-based audience, and what are maybe some of the challenges with having a fan-based audience? Because there are some difficulties, I imagine, as well, of having a very knowledgeable fan-based audience. Rob, perhaps we can start with you this time.
I think the great benefit of an audience that's predominantly fans is that the community that's built out of it, really. And again, it tied into what we were saying about programming. You know, if people trust what you do, we have people who are like, I don't even read the program. I know what I know what you do is what I like. So they trust that what they're going to get something good, which is, you can't buy that. It's something we're really grateful for. I suppose the one challenge that I think comes out of that as well is that, and maybe it's because I kind of, maybe some of the aims that I have for what we do to start to encompass more kind of industry-based stuff, is that we had it last year when we had a lot of guests attending, despite the best efforts of the weather that meant that loads of people couldn't actually come. But we actually had quite a lot of guests on hand. So we created a kind of substrand of like sort of filmmaking panels and masterclasses and this kind of stuff, which was all done a little bit kind of ad hoc, but then it ended up where the audience wasn't really there for it, because our audience isn't necessarily interested in the nuts and bolts of filmmaking. They're more into it's like, I don't care how it was made, I want to watch the film. So that's a challenge, I think, if you're trying to take your festival in a particular direction.
Thanks, Rob. Nia.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think one of the main benefits of a fan audience is that fandom sort of translates to your festival as well. So as in a way, it's basically what Rob was saying, is that, if someone comes to your audience and they like horror and or genre or cult film or whatever it might be, and they sort of like your version of it or your presentation of it, then I think that tendency towards fandom, if that's even I say this as a fan of a lot of things, then that kind of translates over to you as an event as well, which is obviously very nice, because you then develop quite that sort of not inbuilt, but that loyal return audience that is generally there for you year in, year out. I think as well, though, that I suppose that can be a little bit of a challenge, though I wouldn't say it's necessarily a sort of a challenge in that it's a massive problem, but I think, especially because horror is so broad anyway, so we're talking about a lot of people, right, is that loyalty then, of course, makes it harder to potentially tap into, no one can go to every single horror festival that's on in the UK. Why would you? It'd be very tiring. Some people do, I'm sure, and I don't know how they do it, and I respect it very much. So, that if that, once that can then become maybe a challenge if you are sort of maybe starting a new festival or something. It's kind of finding your bit of that audience, or tapping into the people who will travel to lots and try out lots of different events and festivals. Yeah, I think as well that kind of, to me, sometimes I think it can be that, again, that's that sort of tendency towards fandom, I suppose, for your own festival can be a good and a bad thing, because I think it's lovely, because it means people have like a sense of a festival being their festival, which I think is really important. And I think, as we all know, like getting actual audience feedback is always really important, and just talking to people throughout the event itself and everything like that. But then I suppose you might have expectations of what a horror festival looks like based on individual events. So then if you don't get it elsewhere, you think, oh, this isn't quite again, I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily like a bad thing, but it's kind of more of a challenge than you're like, oh yeah, because this is slightly different, or this isn't that, or you know, a little bit of sort of expectation management, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Chris.
Yeah, I agree with everything Rob and Nia have said, actually. I think that one of the things that's interesting that Rob's brought up too is the fact that the vast majority of our passes will sell before we've announced a single film. So the audience, while they're very interested in the films, they're also part of a community of people that come every year. They're really discerning. They sort of hang out in groups together and watch and discuss every film that's on. They don't miss a thing. You know what I mean? So they're really important because they let you know what they think of your programming too. You know what I mean? They're really honest and they're really, you know, they're horror fans, so they're incredibly knowledgeable as well.
Say, so is it easy to get feedback then? Do you think that makes it much easier to kind of know your audience and get feedback because they're going to tell you if they don't like it?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're very honest and they're you know, and they know the genre. They know what's coming up. They know what you've been looking at. They know, you know, what's coming next. And you know, so they're really discerning. I think the other observation is about how, you know, good they are at having conversations with each other and meeting, and you know, because they're often from outside of the town. They often don't see any of the people that are their festival friends for the rest of the year, and then they're firm friends though, and it's really lovely. And there's a plaque on one of the seats at Broadway that says, "Met my partner, had our first child at screening of I Spit on Your Grave."
Well, that's lovely. I hope the child wasn't born during the screening. That would be a bit traumatic.
Oh, I've frozen.
Oh, that's wonderful, but it must be quite gratifying. It must be gratifying though to have that, to know that you've built this. All of you have built these communities that come back year after year, and I think, you know, that's one of the things that I think is a really strong and important part, isn't it, of genre festivals. I want to ask you about something a bit more difficult now. Nothing legally challenging, don't worry. Just about COVID and the sort of post-COVID world. Rob, I read today a blog post by Polly Allen, one of your senior programmer, about how difficult it was during COVID to program, just physically kind of how demanding it was. And I just wanted to ask you all about that period of COVID, of suddenly having to pivot online, or maybe having a bit of a run up, given when your festivals are. You maybe had a bit of time, but it still was a very difficult period. How you reacted to that COVID period, what you changed, how it sort of affected the festival, but also, you know, in the long term, has that changed how you think about your festival and anything that you do? Nia, perhaps we could start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think I remember reading that blog by Polly actually at the time, because I think it was so for context, I suppose what Abertoir did is that it turned out we made the right choice. So we pivoted to be completely online for 2020, because we wanted to make an early decision rather than face planning a physical event that we then couldn't hold because of lockdown rules and what have you. It turned out in the end we could have held our event, however our venue flooded, so irrespective of lockdown we wouldn't have been able to have the event. So fate worked out then, but it was, I think, immensely challenging, because not only was it a case of trying to find, you know, the films to screen and the ones that were taking that leap into sort of online screenings, we had to learn what the hell we were doing online, because we were like, I don't know how you run a film festival online. So we had a lot of a very sharp sort of introduction to all of that world, really. And you know, it's all of that on top of, I think, just the general misery of that period anyway. Like, and you know, of course that's absolutely not remotely unique to someone running a film festival, but it's that kind of trying to adjust something that you know is important to people, because I think we were very keen to do, because we, you know, we were taking part in lots of conversations about, you know, oh, should we just not do it this year because we want to do it in a cinema, or do we do a hybrid, do we do it just online, all of that. All versions of that I think are completely valid versions of what a film festival can look like, but we were very conscious of the fact that we, you know, as much as we were sat home isolated in whatever way, or not so, you know, depending on anyone's situation, each of our audience members in different ways would be facing that same thing. And, you know, we have people who tell us, and again, I'm not, you know, I don't think Abertoir is unique in this at all. We have people that tell us, you know, like, this is my holiday every year. I book my week off work, I come to Abertoir. And you think, God, how can we just do something to recreate a slight hint of what the actual festival might be? And actually, in a way, that I think that process itself was quite difficult is probably a strong word for it, really, but it took a bit of, you know, you had to really like dig into what the essence of the festival is and what the essence of the audience experience is and all that. And actually, I suppose in the end, that's a bit of a valuable exercise. And I think what's been beneficial, but now becoming a challenge in a different way for us, is that we've since then maintained the online aspect of the festival. So in 2021, we were hybrid, in that I say hybrid, yeah, in that we started the festival physically, and with social distancing in place in our auditorium, and then sort of finished the program online. So if you were only online, you got half the program essentially. But that was our Frankenstein year, because we thought that would be kind of a nice horror spin on that. But we have then since held a sort of almost like a sort of catch-up version online, I suppose. So a much smaller version of our physical program online, because now we're very conscious of the fact that that online space reaches people that we're not going to reach otherwise. However, for us, from a sort of more sort of practically minded perspective, it's getting increasingly hard to do that. And it's sort of, you know, it's an ongoing conversation as to how do we do that in a way that is financially sustainable, that is team capacity sustainable, but is also serving an audience that we know is there and that we want to reach and that we want to include as part of Abertoir. So I think that's sort of the impact of COVID, or rather the situation of COVID. In some ways, we're sort of still handling it in some ways, because it has become a sort of a longer conversation beyond what COVID itself was actually sort of causing us to think about.
It's a big tension, isn't it? Because actually, a lot of people have said there's accessibility issues now in terms of being able to access things they couldn't before, with subtitles and all of those things as well. So it's not just being able to go, but all of those other things that festivals often can't do. But there's that tension as to whether you can keep that going, right? Chris?
Yeah, we kept our COVID edition as a skeleton edition. I like the idea of calling them Frankenstein editions as well, but we've got a Frankenstein pass. But so we had a skeleton edition, which was essentially a kind of minimalist festival that kind of, you know, like a seat warming exercise that kind of said, we're still here, we're still going to run, we're going to put on one film per day, so socially distanced and everybody's welcome. And, you know, and it worked. But it was a very minimalist kind of thing. It was very much about saying, you know, we're going to stick with our venue, we're going to work with you as an audience, and we're going to be here. But we didn't go online. And I don't know what the difference would have been. It's really interesting listening to Nia's conversation there, actually. But we were happy to do a skeleton edition just to kind of say to the audience, we will be back. That's an optimistic thing to say.
Well, yeah, I guess. But at that time, you don't know. But actually, that optimism was quite important, right?
Yeah.
Given what was happening, but also for your audience. So that's a great thing to do. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, we as obviously as the situation unfolded, we were kind of open to ideas of how we could go forward, and we had conversations with the Abertoir guys and Chris and Steve and a few other festivals about what was everybody going to do. And for us, there was two things really which led to us sticking with an in-person edition, which was pretty much a full weekend as we normally do, but obviously with a lot of sort of adaptations to make it work. So the main thing, I mean, Nia touched on it, where about the films that some were being allowed for online screenings, a lot weren't. And for us, it kind of felt like, even though at the time this was there was bigger things going on in the world, but for us, it would have meant seriously compromising the programming, because it was like, I think about 70% of the stuff that we wanted wasn't allowed for online. So it was like, okay, well, that's, I'd rather go with the in-person, which then brought its own challenges. So we ended up doing, in the 6 weeks between the first lockdown and then going back into lockdown in the November, the 6 weeks while our venue was actually open, we fell in the middle of that, which was, just blind luck, really. And we did 2 screens, which were running at about 25% capacity, so vastly reduced. So we had the 2 big screens at the showroom in Sheffield. We did, they were running one an hour later than the other, so we pre-recorded all of our introductions so that we didn't have to unnecessarily just be hanging around. So we were around for setup, we were around at the times where we were absolutely needed to be around, but we actively chose to, because of obviously it's a health emergency, we didn't want to just be hanging about for no reason. And it was very, very strange. It was a very strange experience to go through that. And obviously the sort of the social aspect of a film festival is a massive part of it. Well, I mean, we do like a karaoke party at the end of the festival, so we couldn't obviously do that. But even when you take away all of that stuff, and you had people who are having to sit like in family groups on tables apart from one another and stuff in breaks, and everyone masked and so on, and then for the festival to basically just end on the Sunday night without any kind of socializing or sort of celebration, it was strange. But we definitely felt from our audience that they appreciated it, because it was like, and we had a lot of messages saying, it was strange, but we really needed it.
Yeah, those things I think felt particularly important, didn't it, at the time? There's opportunities to kind of meet, and even if you were masked and you were socially distanced, that's actually, you realize how important those interactions are for people, really. We're drawing towards the point where we'll go across to the audience fairly soon, so they can ask some questions. But I want to ask you all something a bit more sort of long term, as you are festival running veterans, I guess would be the polite expression. I don't know what the polite expression is. I just wondered.
Suffering.
I just wondered what you felt had changed from when you started your festivals to now, in the kind of film festival firmament, what the genre film festival or the horror film festival scene, either in the UK or in the world, however you want to take it, really. What's different now, do you think? Chris, perhaps we could start with you.
Oh no, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is. I think really, I know what's changed for us, and we're all kind of near networked observers of each other as well. You know what I mean? So we can always see where we're all at and swap notes. So the conversation's always been really consistent, and any kind of changes have always been really understood and appreciated. I think streaming has brought its own changes to things in terms of how you approach stuff and what it is you're asking for. And sometimes that's meant that conversations get harder and harder as organizations that run streaming companies get smaller and smaller in terms of their actual marketing department. I won't name who I'm talking about, but Nia and Rob know. But it is that kind of thing where I kind of think what we've learned across that period of time is to really concentrate on the kind of the sort of bread and butter programming. Do you know what I mean? Like to think about the strong spine of a 4-day festival, or longer in some cases, aren't there? So and to really think about what it is you're giving to an audience consistently. Do you know what I mean? And what it is they're going to get for their money. and try and keep them on side. So we've just been really consistent and focusing on what it is we best deliver.
Thanks, Chris. Nia.
Yeah. I
Go
think,
back in your memory.
I can't remember what I did this morning, to be quite honest with you. I think, I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about myself quite a lot recently, actually, is the fact that there are a lot more horror festivals and events now. And I almost feel like a rubbish horror fan because I feel like I've lost track of like the entire, you know, every year now I see sometimes, you know, insert city here horror festival, and they're like, we're in our 3rd year, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss this happening? And I think that's really, really exciting, and I wish I had a stronger grasp of like the newer festivals that are out there. And I think, you know, like horror feels, well, for a while now, but feels more popular or bigger than it was, I suppose, when any of our festivals were starting. It was more niche back then. I mean, horror comes and goes as it does anyway, we know that, but I don't know that that necessarily, that or like that current sort of popularity necessarily translates into like what am I talking about? Like a higher regard for a horror festival, if that makes sense. I don't think it's necessarily that sort of fan audience or the type of audience that might be like, yes, I'm going to go sit for 6 days in a cinema in deepest, darkest mid Wales, that is going and watching, you know, whatever at the cinema, or like a streaming, you know, a big hitter on streaming and what have you. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think, you know, that is in some ways, I suppose, something we have to respond to in terms of programming as well, is kind of going, it sort of spins back to that kind of those sort of outlier films where you go, well, I think it's a horror film, you probably won't, and you'll probably hate it, but here you go, you wouldn't have seen it at home, so you've seen it here. Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think the streaming point that Chris makes actually is actually probably one I wouldn't have thought of myself, though it is arguably, I think, the biggest change that has perhaps happened. And it's brilliant because I think it means that certain horror films or more horror films get an amount of exposure that maybe they weren't otherwise getting. But at the same time, as a festival organizer, I think sometimes the value of a festival circuit gets lost in that, because I can think of several films, often films directed by women, that get snapped up by streaming services, and then they get put on a streaming service. And I'm like, I would have really liked if that film had had a load of festival screenings, and we could have had Q&As, and we could have done all of that stuff. And, you know, okay, yeah, might get one screening here or there and whatnot. And maybe that's not a very common occurrence, to be fair. Maybe I just feel that more keenly because I can think of a few examples of that. But I think it's interesting. I think there's benefits and sort of challenges in the ongoing and probably never going away sort of streaming landscape that we're in now.
Yeah. Rob.
Yeah, I'd like to third the streaming comment. I think, you know, it's a good, it is obviously a good development, and it does give that exposure, I think. But yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of opportunity for festivals to represent a theatrical run for these films, which and in a way convincing distributors that your festival is worth their time has been the same all the way through, really, just in different modes. But a couple of other things that came to mind when you asked the question, the landscape of exhibition has kind of changed a lot in the time that we've been going. Like our first edition, we were screening films from DVD, Digibeta, HD Cam, 35mm, and now it's all DCP, apart from when we throw a screening of some obscure 35mm movie on and don't tell anybody what it is. The other thing as well, I think, is the kind of like democratization of like film production as well. Like you can have films that are made on a very, very low budget, more in the time since we first started to now, where the standard is technically the standard is significantly higher, I think. So whether that's features or particularly shorts as well, there was a time where you would, your short film submissions, there will be a lot of them, if they were made for next to nothing, they wouldn't look particularly great. Whereas I think now there's a tendency for films, even if they're not the right fit for your festival, that there's a greater technical quality to them, I think. And that, that can only be applauded, I think.
Right, thanks, Rob. Right, so I'm gonna have final question. So if you want to put any questions that you've got in the chat, I can see one's just come up, I think. I'll come back to that one in a second. Thanks, Laura. Just one final question, just a kind of quick fire question for each of you. If you could go back to your early 2000 selves when you were starting your festival, what would be the one piece of advice you would give yourself? Nia, you look horrified. I'm going to ask you first.
I would say do more physical exercise because it takes a lot of stamina and my back hurts a lot, is what I would say to myself.
Thanks, Nia. Chris?
I'd agree with Nia, really. I mean, my back's fallen apart from just sitting down watching films over and over again. I need to do more yoga during the festival. So I would be advising yoga to my younger, better-looking self, and I'd also be telling him not to drink quite as much.
Thanks, Chris. Rob? Yeah, agreed on both of those points from Chris. But also, I think I would probably say, just keep the faith. It'll be all right.
Great, thank you.
Won't get any easier.
Great, thank you all very much. I'm just going to go to the questions in the chat now, so bear with me 1 second. Right, question from Kate Egan. Says, thanks everyone for a fascinating discussion. All 3 of your festivals take place in great venues, but how do you think the specific characteristics, strengths or restrictions of the venues and their location have shaped your respective festivals and their character over the years? So how important have your venues been to the way in which your festivals have kind of shaped up over the years? Let's start with Nia.
I would say, thank you for the question. Hello, Kate. I think for us, very important, I would say. I mean, partially down to the fact that Gaz runs the cinema in the venue as his day job. We're very, very fortunate that we're given the good grace to take over for 6 days. And I think, like I sort of alluded to earlier, I suppose we try to make the most of the fact that we are in a sort of multi-auditorium place and that we do try to encroach on the theatre every year and have sort of a performance angle and things like that. And then sort of just to touch on location as well, I suppose, I think, we're in a town that's very annoying to reach, as anyone who has ever been to Aberystwyth or travelled from Aberystwyth, it does work both ways, will know. But I think that has both been a sort of a good thing and a bad thing, or rather it's been beneficial to us and a bit of a challenge for us. So one is that you kind of go, we have to accept the fact that not everyone is going to want to travel all the way to a random Welsh town they've never heard of before to try out a horror festival they've not been to before. But having said that, I think it works in its favour because it is literally the end of the train line. It's by the sea. We do it in November. It's dark. It's atmospheric, and actually, that in itself is quite appealing. So I think that's been quite nice, and we do sort of try and play up that element of it a little bit sometimes as well. Yeah.
Rob.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, every time I've been to Abertoir, I felt like the protagonist of like an affable idiot from a H.P. Lovecraft story descending into the unknown. So yeah, it's always been a big part of it for me. Yeah, I mean the showroom has been our home all the way along, and I can't imagine it being anywhere else really. It's really well placed with the cafe bar, because that's the kind of like social hub of what we do at the festival. They let us stay there till like 3 o'clock in the morning on the final night to sing karaoke badly. And also just the support from the staff there and the technical staff, front of house operations, they're all really good at what they do, and they support what we want to do as well. Over time, there's obviously, in 16 years, staff have come and gone, but there's the current setup and the current team, I couldn't ask for a better support really. So yeah, it's fairly key to what we do, and I do think it holds the structure of what we do together.
Right, thanks, Rob. Chris.
Yeah, our venue is really important to us, not only because they've underwritten us as well in the past, but because they're really supportive, of course. They really are. I mean, that's how we managed to be going as long as we have done. But the space itself is really kind of welcoming. It's really, relaxed. It's warm. It's comfortable. There are 2 bars, 1 cafe bar. The screen's really nice. The production staff love running the festival from that point of view. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of a really kind of collaborative environment, and hopefully one that makes everybody in the audience feel included and wanted and part of the 4 days as well, really. So it's helped shape programming. Do you know what I mean? Like how long the breaks should be, and all those kind of strategic kind of little details. Do you know what I mean? It's been being able to collaborate with such a brilliant venue has been, invaluable.
Fantastic, thank you. Just to say, if anyone does want to come on camera to ask a question, please feel free. But just in your question, just tell me if you want to come on camera. Question from Laura. So she says, I wondered what the panelists' thoughts on festivals' responsibilities for ensuring inclusivity in terms of both representation in programming and also at the event itself, i.e. ensuring festivals are welcoming spaces for a diverse audience. Rob, do you want to, I don't know if you want to start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's always been a level within the team of that kind of just coming naturally, but I think particularly in the current day and age, I think you almost can't just rely on it being like obvious. Do you know what I mean? So it's something that we've always kind of had in mind. I mean, our team is 3/4 female identifying, which is, it's a great team to work with. In terms of the audience, I mean, we're mindful of it when we're programming as well, of perhaps some of the content and the types of films, because we're obviously dealing with horror, but I think we have a responsibility as well to give people a heads up of when there is potentially material that might be not problematic, but that people might need fair warning of, let's say, without obviously going into spoiler territory. But I mean, we just kind of keep in mind that we want to just be a welcoming kind of environment, and when we're looking at programming as well, the sort of diversity and inclusion is something we're looking at with filmmaking talent and people that we work with, just to sort of try and make all voices heard. Really, it's an ongoing process, I think.
Thanks, Rob. Chris.
Yeah, I agree with what Rob says. Really, I think what we've tried to do as well is to not just be welcoming, but to listen as well. So if people have got any issues or films were received in a way that we didn't expect, then we take on board that point of view as quickly as we can. And I think those conversations are really, really important in the kind of ongoing development of not just the programming, but the festival itself. You know what I mean? You want to take an audience with you. You don't want to alienate an audience. So those conversations happen during programming and then happen during the festival as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. Nia.
I could probably fill a whole webinar, Chris, to be quite honest with you. Thank you for the question, Laura. I mean, I think it is, as Chris and Rob have said, it is absolutely a huge responsibility of any festival or any event, full stop, whatever it might be, to ensure a basic degree of effort towards sort of inclusivity, not just in representation, but in the event itself, as has been touched on. And I think, sort of like what Rob was saying, I think over the years, it's been a relatively, we've maybe, I suppose in a way, been a little bit blasé with it, because we've always felt like, oh well, we're a welcoming festival and it comes naturally to us, because it sort of does, you know. I think we're nice people on the team, and therefore a lot of those things and those considerations have come naturally. We've, you know, had conversations with people, we've programmed stuff with over the years and so on. But I think over the past few years, we've definitely moved a lot more towards formalizing a lot of that, because I actually think that not signposting, but like flagging that stuff happens is actually a really important part of it as well. So for example, like over the past, say, I don't know, maybe COVID allowed us time to do this, and thinking space for this stuff. I couldn't say for sure, but I suspect it might have been. But you know, we now have a full or I put together a full content guide for everything we show at the festival, which is on our website and is available for people to refer to. So, and that has sort of come from audience feedback of people going, oh, you know, it's not a big deal, but I wish I'd known that XYZ was in that film. And we always used to flag really, you know, major things that we thought, if it was a particularly extreme film, or if it had, say, if it was an old exploitation film and there was a moment of like animal cruelty or something like that, we would always have flagged those. But now we have a full content, well, to the best of our ability, a full content guide. But we also have, we've recently sort of formalized our code of conduct, which again has always felt like such a sort of commonsensical thing. But then you're like, actually, no, maybe we do need to write this down, because we don't know what our guests might be like, who our audience might be, who's new to the festival, etc. You want something like that written down that's there, I think, and quite important. And we recently undertook good night out training, or rather we collaborated with our venue to undertake good night out training, which is essentially sort of accreditation scheme for venue, sort of nighttime economy venues, shall we say, to sort of tackle sexual harassment and other things as well. So we've done that because again, I think having something like that, and that is our venue actually that we've sort of worked with, is a really important thing, because it is a signal of sort of you're not just paying lip service to being inclusive, like, oh, we're inclusive, which is arguably what we used to do, even though I like to think, and I hope that we have always been that way. And things like accessibility information as well. I've put a lot of information on our accessibility page, and I'm constantly thinking of, if I see something that I think should be added, even if I'm, you know, I might not, you know, it's like Rob was saying, I think, or Chris, that it's a constantly evolving thing, that you're always coming, you know, you're always learning different things to add to that. And I think also just to, sorry, I'm going on, just to bring it back to programming as well, is I think, again, as Chris and Rob have said, it is something you always keep in mind. And I mean, something that we've sort of been doing the past few years, that I think with a little bit of understanding that you're definitely not always going to get it right, but is keeping things in mind. Like I've found something I've found personally quite influential to me when I approach programming anyways. The charity Changing Faces does a lot of campaigning on sort of visible differences being used as markers of villainy, which horror is really, really guilty of. So, you know, I approach classics a little bit more differently than I would new films. If I see a new film and it's just like a you know, a special effects makeup scarred villain, I just kind of think this film has got to be really flipping good and special for me to actually see past this, because we're done with that. Like, you know, we're past that point. And I think just to wrap up, sorry, is the audience feedback, again, just to pick up on, I think, what Rob and Chris are saying, audience feedback on this stuff is really important. I know last year we showed a couple of films at Abertoir that our audience were, one in particular that we really enjoyed. Turns out we might be bad people, because we had a lot of audience feedback telling us that it was an extremely unethical film and that we probably should never have had it see the light of day. I won't name the film. But I was actually, I mean, I was sort of disappointed that we'd screened it, given the sort of strength of feeling, because I then felt like, oh God, I missed a trick on that one. Like, that was like, that wasn't just a split audience, that was a strong response. But then I was having conversations with the audience, and it was very much a sort of a trusting audience, that they were like, I actually feel confident enough that I can very clearly say this to you, and I know you'll take it on, as in you, the festival, that you'll take it on board, that, you know, I feel comfortable enough in this festival to be able to express my strength of opinion on a film like this and to talk about it as an audience and things like that. So in some ways it was sort of like, it was nice to learn a little something about like, ooh, maybe we should think a bit more closely about that sort of content. But it was also in a way a little bit, I don't want to say comforting, but it was comforting to know that we had at least fostered a sort of environment where people felt comfortable to speak up on something like that. And I would hope that the same would be true on sort of the event basis rather than the on-screen basis as well. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Hello, first of all, hello, Tris. I just saw your question, Tris, and Nia, you've just answered Tris's question. So thanks, Tris, for the question and for the answer, as it were. Question from Melanie Light. Hi, Melanie. They say, hi, with the current state of the film industry and the recent struggles to make genre films, how do you see the future of films and being able to keep up a tight programme? In particular, how have you seen the change in the British horror film industry recently? Also, Melanie wants to say thank you for everyone that supported their work at festivals. So, yeah, what kind of changes, I guess, have you seen or in the British horror film industry at the moment? What do you kind of see the future as well?
It's an interesting programming question as well, really, because I kind of think that we want to represent British filmmaking, and sometimes you can feel the pressure that's on the industry because you're not getting as many films up there for consideration, and you're not getting as many films made that are being picked up by distributors. So it is kind of, it is there in the background. There are sort of exceptions. Every now and then you come across a nice film that kind of works with a really low budget and does something really unique, like To Fire You Come at Last, the kind of mid-length, difficult to program because of its mid-length, but really terrific film. But what you want is more, and you want more indies, and you want more films that have got filmmakers like Melanie representing the films to be able to get out to festivals and meet their audiences. So you want more of that, and it feels like maybe that's a bit of pressure on them at the moment. We'll have to see.
Rob.
It's a hard one because, again, much like Chris is saying, first of all, thanks to Melanie, big fan. So it's tricky in terms of like the overview of like British kind of horror as it stands, because there's always a bit of snobbery, I think, with even for film, in some cases for film, whether it's on the level of maybe not on the level of the filmmakers, but certainly in some cases there'll be a distributor that doesn't want to do horror festivals with their clearly a horror film, or they only want to do one of the top tier festivals and they don't. And then there's this kind of overriding sort of snobbery to it, which is frustrating because it's these are films that we potentially would champion, and again it feeds into that what we were talking about before of it being potentially a pseudo theatrical release, but then obviously you've got kind of you've got really low budget British kind of indie filmmaking that there's a lot to be said for it, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, but again it's about which festivals are the right fit for it, I think, if that's not too vague an answer.
No, that makes sense. Thanks, Rob. Nia.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't necessarily have like the strongest grasp on like the state of the production industry, shall we say, except that I know that it's not currently in a good place, like so many sort of sectors reliant on various pots of sort of public funding and grants and things like this that don't necessarily work the way they need to be working, or the resources are as stretched as they are. And I think it's it's something that we're always quite conscious of in terms of wanting to support sort of like homegrown, I suppose, filmmaking and so on. And like we feel it in particular with like wanting to support Welsh films that are made as well, though there are fewer of them. And it's I don't know, for me, I think part of it is it's complicated because a lot of it ties down to, like, I think Rob was touching on things like what distributors want to do with a film, whether they want it anywhere near a horror festival because they think somehow that's going to make their horror film less sellable, even though it's a horror film. It happens quite a lot and things like that. But it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of reminded of it kind of has made me think that I ought to be paying more attention to this sort of thing as a programmer, as a sort of film festival organizer, is, you know, looking at some of the stuff that the makers of Raging Grace have been saying about the way their film has been not programmed on its theatrical, or not as programmed on its theatrical release as you might expect. Partially perhaps because it is bordering sort of like genre and drama and sort of touching on like social realism stuff, but through a lens of genre, etc., etc. And the fact that it was like the funding wasn't there for it, despite the fact that it's a very groundbreaking sort of film, and a very important film, I believe. Yeah, sorry, that's a really unsatisfying answer for me to give to you.
No, thank you. And thanks, Melanie, for the question. It's a great
yeah,
question.
definitely.
Question from Craig. Craig says, if I had £1 for every time I've heard someone say that was good, but it wasn't a horror film, and this fits in very much near to what you just talked about, he says he'd have at least 30 quid. He says, how do you approach programming stuff at the boundaries of the genre? At what point is something not horror enough? Are there films you've chosen not to play for that reason, for instance? And for you, Chris, specifically, he asks, have you noticed much resistance to the non-horror titles since you decided to broaden Mayhem's remit? So perhaps we can start with you, Chris, actually.
Yes and no. There you go. I kind of think we always find those boundaries during kind of programming, and then think, oh my God, I really love this film. I really want to put it in front of an audience, but is it going to be X enough or Y enough or whatever it might be? We kind of bite the bullet now that we know that we've got that cult wedge in the door. So cult films are coming in, and whatever that means, it's also a kind of meaningless thing, cult. It's allowing us to umbrella a huge amount of things that we kind of would like to program. I think She Is Conan last year was a really good example of that. There was no pushback from it. Everybody was impressed by the filmmaking. Everyone was impressed by what it was doing as a piece of filmmaking. So that was really terrific. Animal Kingdom, the French Cannes competition film, was like, in one level, you know, in the old days before we were a cult festival, we would have said we'll put it in anyway because we're just saying it's on the fringes of horror, because people must be horrified if they're turning into animals. So whatever it might have been, we would have found a reason to do it. But Animal Kingdom was one of those films where you come up to the audience, or during the film, because you could hear people crying, you thought, I wonder if they're going to really take to the film or not. And there are people coming up saying it was such an emotional film. They were really, really happy for it to be on at the festival. They could watch it with a crowd. I mean, it's not had that big a release at all yet. I don't think it's had a release yet. And you kind of think, if it has, it's been a really whispery, quiet one. And you're there thinking that kind of cinema is kind of rare, so get it on. And we've got like a whole weekend, you know what I mean? So there are other films coming along, and not everyone's going to agree on every film you program. So we've not had much pushback at all, really. We've just always allowed ourselves a bit of a leeway with some of those films that are more difficult.
Great, thanks, Chris. Rob?
The golden phrase in our neck of the woods is horror adjacent, which I particularly like. Yeah, we've always been quite broad, because that was kind of one of the defining principles, really, when we started Celluloid Screams, is to challenge what you might ordinarily think of as horror. So it's about, because I was obviously seeing films at other festivals that I was visiting that were so far beyond what you would you know, your average person might call horror, so the stuff that's in the multiplex. So it was a big drive really in starting the festival to sort of showcase that the genre is as broad as you make it, really. So I think for us, it's a fine line really, because you sometimes do have films that are really good, and but you wouldn't necessarily call them horror. But would that make us not program them? Not necessarily. I mean, we've screened stuff that is quite fringe in some cases. You know, like Moorhead and Benson's films are not what you would necessarily call traditionally horror, but we have screened all of them, I think. Stuff like The Nightingale is not what you would call a horror film, but we showed it, and you know, there was no major kind of backlash. Obviously, with something like that, touching back on what we were saying about content warnings and fair warning of what the films contain, I guess for me, within reason, I would rather program an interesting film that's a bit on the fringe than a stereotypical horror film that doesn't really do anything for me.
Right, thanks, Rob. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can just echo what Chris and Rob have already said, really, because we you know, I mean, last year we reached a point where we were like, do we have any actual horror films lined up in our program? Are these all horror adjacent or horror like ish? But I think by now it's almost become a sort of almost like an unofficial feature of the festival, I suppose, is we always kind of go, this is the one that isn't even a horror film, when it's something nice. Like River last year won our audience award. It's not a horror film in the slightest, and our audience voted it their favorite. So that's not the first time that's happened either. But also to the opposite end with something like She Is Conan, where you kind of go, sometimes it's about a vibe, you know. That's really sort of wishy-washy sort of way to put it. But sometimes I feel like it does depend on the film. It does come down to going, is this dark? Sometimes it's about, is the film dark enough to be sort of considered horror? Is it about an ordeal of some sort? Is it sort of about that kind of thing? But sometimes it is just going, you know what, River is a really great film and we want to show it, so we're putting River on. And I think as long as the balance is there in the program, that you haven't got a program full of non-horror films like River, then the audience is happy to go with it, I think.
Fabulous. So we've got 2 more questions left in 10 minutes, and we've also, one thing I want to ask you, or Laura wanted to ask you, was if you could think about in the meantime, just to we'll finish up with this after those 2 questions, is iconic moments for you from your festivals, things that stick in your mind, favorite guests, favorite moments from your festival. Have a think about those for a moment. But so the first of the final 2 questions is from Gerard. It says, flirting with the idea of launching a film offshoot of a sci-fi, fantasy and horror fan festival of the more general geeky kind. I'm wondering what the budgeting realities of film festivals like the ones present are. So what's the kind of financial landscape for genre festivals? Chris, do you want to start with you?
I don't know what it would be like jumping in right now. You know what I mean? Cinemas have taken a hit, so I think it's a conversation that needs to be had between you and your venue, so there becomes much bigger collaboration. I think you know what I mean, because you're not necessarily going to need like a huge budget to begin with. You're going to be spending a ton programming, so it's about making deals with distributors about what the value of a screening to them will be in terms of a minimum guarantee, and then moving on from there. That sounds really technical, like a minimum guarantee. That's like the minimum amount they'll make from the screening, so you can offer them that or against a percentage. So you know, you might say we'll give you 250 quid a film, but you're going to have to sell those tickets. So that's the warning for anyone jumping in. But I don't know what the landscape's like in terms of affordability for any venues at the moment. I think they're recovering still.
Right, thanks, Chris. Nia.
Yeah, I think it's, I almost feel like I can't answer the question, because I think with Abertoir we're very fortunate, one, again, that we have the trust of our venue, that it's sort of, you know, run and established by Gaz, who works at that venue already, but also we are publicly funded. So I don't know now, if we were starting fresh, if we were a sort of a brand new festival, what we would be getting ourselves into in terms of that landscape, which is obviously facing all sorts of you know, budgetary tightness and cuts and all sorts. And without that funding, we're very fortunate that Film Cymru Wales and Film Hub Wales both support us in different ways. I don't think we'd be able to do what we do the way we currently do it without that funding. And I couldn't tell you what it would be like really to try for smaller and smaller pots of that sort of funding at the moment.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same sort of opinion as Chris and Nia. I think if we were to try and start Celluloid Screams now, it would be hard. I think it would be difficult. You know, the sector, the exhibition sector is facing tough times. I think in fact, anyone looking to get into film festivals, I would say don't plan on like retiring on the proceeds. But yeah, but you know, on a more serious note, I think I wouldn't discourage someone from doing it, but I think it's about being realistic with what you're trying to do, really. Like Nia says, I think doing the but then again, you know, we've been doing this for 16 years now, so it's about taking things gradually and doing it bit by bit, you know, whether that's like a series of one-off screenings or a, you know, if you can finding a kind of suitable and sort of open and supportive venue is a start at the very least. But yeah, I say go for it. What have you got to lose?
Great, thanks, Rob. Thanks for the question, Gerard. We've got 5 minutes left. We've got one question, and then I'll ask you your sort of favourite memories from your festivals. This is from Bruna. Hi, Bruna. Question is there a film which you absolutely have always wanted to screen, but for any reason you haven't been able to yet? Basically, if you could screen any film, what would it be? Nia, let's start with you.
Okay, rather than think about it for too long because of the time, I'm going to go with a film that we were the sales agent or distributor, whoever it was, went cold on us, which I really wanted to screen, which was The Lure, which is the Polish mermaid musical set in the 80s, because that is one of my favorite films of the past however many years, and I love it, and I wish we could have screened it, and I'm sure half the audience would have hated it. They always do with the ones that I really love, and that's half the fun. So that would be my choice.
That would divide people. It's quite bonkers, that film, isn't it?
It's great.
Rob.
Again, I'm going to go quick fire. I think one that I've always wanted to screen, and it's been prohibitively expensive, is Riccio, Story of Ricky, because yeah, you have to license it from Hong Kong, and they want an extraordinary amount of money, and then shipping on top. So yeah, that's what I would do if I suddenly had a windfall.
That's exactly what I was going to say as well, Rob. I was going to say Story of Riccio. It's kind of been after it forever, and it's always been out of our range financially speaking. And you just keep thinking, what a great midnight movie that is. Why can't we put it on? And then every year you have another go. Go around the roundabout trying to get it. So my spontaneous answer is Rob's spontaneous answer as well.
No, it's great, thank you. Actually, Chris, as we're with you, what's your sort of favourite memory or something that you remember from Mayhem that's stuck with you that you absolutely love?
I can't remember anything. My favourite one, I think, really, there's two that I really love. One was when we had Gareth Edwards as a guest after he'd done Monsters, and he's a really lovely bloke, and he said, can he do a masterclass? So we got him to do a masterclass, which was really well attended, on how you can make monsters at home using just off-the-shelf software and putting it together. And it was beautiful. His laptop plugged into this huge screen, while this little silhouette of a guy just down there at the bottom typing up all these amazing practical solutions to making your monster movie. So that was really, really cool. But my favorite guest and event was an off-site one. And I know you were thinking about talking about off-site events, Russ. An off-site one with Nick Rogue and his brilliant wife. We took them out to St Mary's Church and screened Don't Look Now with a Q&A for him. And he was just wonderful. It was just a really, really brilliant opportunity to say hello and to get his book signed. You know what I mean? What do you want me to sign in it, Chris? I don't know, just to Chris, I said, and that's what I got.
Wonderful. Rob?
There's quite a lot. I've been furiously scribbling down notes since you set the question up. Guest wise, I mean, we've been really fortunate. You know, we've had like Rhys Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton when they came and did kind of back-to-back episodes of Inside Number 9. We've had Brian Usner, Frank Henenlotter. We had Goblin performing the live score of Deep Red, which was a real highlight. We did karaoke with the cast of Wellington Paranormal, which was a huge amount of fun. But I think making those connections with filmmakers and with our audience, many of whom started, coming to our festival at the very beginning, and we have now become firm friends. That's a big part of it and a big favourite for me. One last thing, if I may just add.
Go on. Yeah, please do.
The first year of the festival, we screened a movie called Neighbour. I don't know if anybody knows that one. It's like a home invasion movie. And the producer came over and we did the Q&A, and one of the first questions was, I thought this was going to be like funny games, but this was like funny games for morons. So that was my first year's experience of doing a Q&A and having to field a question like that, which is still one of my favourite moments, weirdly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Nia?
Okay, I've narrowed it down to 2, though, like everyone else. I mean, how do you even pick? But I've gone from like similar moments, but like the sublime and the ridiculous. And one is from many years ago. We we showed a Japanese film called Horny House of Horror. Classic. It's not. But I can distinctly remember Gaz. It was a midnight screening, obviously. Gaz and I being stood at the back of the cinema, having watched the film about 8 months previously at Brussels, watching the film on the screen and just going, do you remember it being quite this full on? And him, no, and we were both like, what have we done? What is this? And just having that real like, wow, we're really putting this filth on our tiny little cinema screening in Aberystwyth. But then like the flip side of that was probably definitely one of my favorite moments, which was 2 years ago. Maybe 1 year, no, 2 years ago, when we, as part of the BFI's in Dreams and Monsters season, we dedicated a day of the festival to blaxploitation horror in honour of Blacula's 50th anniversary, and we somehow got director of Blacula, William Crane, over to the UK. He never left America or North America in his life. He came all the way to Aberystwyth, and we thought, oh God, we hope he's going to have a good time out of this. And we had sort of an extensive Q&A with him. And again, it's one of those standing in the back of the auditorium when something's going on moments, and he's doing this Q&A and he's talking about how sort of like how good he felt talking about his films, his film being taken seriously, getting questions from the audience and stuff, and how he felt really happy to be there. And I was just like, that's it. That's one of those moments, definitely.
Right, it's fabulous. I'm going to very quickly tell you mine, which is an Abertoir moment, which was picking up Claudio Simonetti with Gaz from Liverpool Airport and Demonia, driving around all these. For anyone who's never been to Aberystwyth, there's sort of very, very windy roads to get in. We were in this sort of very rattly minivan, and the first thing Claudio Simonetti did was open the door and projectile vomited out the side onto the pavement in Aberystwyth. Should be a little plaque there probably, but anyway, I shall leave you on that. But listen, I just want to say a huge thank you, and I'm sure everyone in the audience will, to Nia, to Chris, and to Rob. That's really, really fascinating stuff. And thank you, because I appreciate you've given up your time. And thank you to everyone who's here as well, to the audience. Really appreciate you being here as well. And yeah, see you at the next one. Thank you all.
Thank you, Russ.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Russ and to our fantastic panelists, Nia, Chris, and Rob. And just to say thank you so much to everybody who came along tonight. Keep an eye out on our socials and our website. We'll put the recording of this event up there, and there'll also be news about our next event, which we're hopeful will be in May and should be on Sound and Horror. So yeah, watch this space. We'll keep in touch. Thanks very much, everybody. See you again.